Hey guys, Tech Rally here, and today we're going to be working on a front-end eval problem. If you've been watching my previous videos, we've been grinding out these front-end development exercises on front-end eval. And if you didn't know what it is, it's a platform with free exercises for you to practice modern front-end development interviews. So if you find yourself needing to prepare for those type of interviews, I highly recommend you to check them out and work with me to solve some of these problems. So let's go ahead and read the prompt of our question. Specifically, what we're going to be working on is the data fetching and visualization. In the data fetching and visualization, the prompt says, retrieve a list of numbers from an endpoint, then plot a histogram showing the frequency of each number in the list. The histogram should have appropriately numbered x's and y-axis. In the example below, the list contains 24 ones, 17 twos, 33s, and so on. To get this started, fork one of the following CodePen templates. So I have the endpoint open and it looks like it's just a bunch of numbers that are kind of being populated, not necessarily in a JSON. So it looks like we're going to need to do some formatting and whatnot. But essentially, it looks like we need to keep a tracker of all the numbers that are outputted and how many times it shows up. So let's go to the code first. And how I'm going to do this is going to be relatively interesting. And maybe I'll just pseudocode just a little bit here. So I think there's a bit of stuff that we need to address. And I just want to make sure it's easy to see. Cool. So we need to figure out how to keep track of how many times a number comes out. Then we need to essentially make a graph or a chart, depending on how you see it. And that's going to require some CSS. And we also need to figure out how do we vertically make sure the number of times a single number shows up is proportional to the height of the graph. And how do we output the X labels, right? So I think the easiest one right now is probably how to keep track of how many times a number comes out. And we're just probably going to leverage the API to do that. Making the stuff in CSS and HTML might be a little bit trickier. So I think we're just going to go back and forth and I'll kind of show you how I think we're going to be able to resolve this. So let's just go ahead and get this started. Right now, we just have this thing called hello front-end eval. So let's just get rid of that for now. And we'll just say hello world. Let's do the first thing. Let's try to figure out how to keep track of how many times the number comes out. So if you know that we have this API endpoint, we need to figure out a way to go from this API endpoint call to some kind of tracking of system. So I'm imagining in my head that we're going to create something like an object that has one comes out 20 times, 2 comes out 40 times, 3 comes out 10 times, etc., etc. So I'm going to try to see if we can make an object like this. The first thing that we're going to do is we're just going to copy this endpoint URL and then call it const API URL equals this value. And then I'm just going to create a async function that we call immediately because I assumed we're going to make an async call inside of this function. And if you don't know how this works, all it does is that it's going to just call this anonymous function that we create right when the URL loads. So if I do console.log.hi and then I refresh it and I open this console, you'll see hi. So in here is where I'm going to want to make my API request. So I'm just going to say const rec equals await fetch API URL. And then what we're going to do is do a response where we await the rec.text. And if you're wondering why I'm doing rec.text, and it's because that we are looking at an endpoint that's not necessarily returning a JSON object, but it's just returning a text. So if we console log out this response here, Let's see what comes out. It's just a list of numbers like this. And you'll see that it's not nicely put in. So we have to get rid of these new lines and we have to trim and make our return data a little bit easier to read. So what we're going to do is call numbers.response.trim. And let's just see what comes out if we do that. Nothing much, right? We're just trimming out the white spacing. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to split it by a new line, I believe. Oh, actually, I think I messed up. I think it's that. So let's see what numbers come out. Sweet. And then I'm going to map it and then just call it number. And if I do that, it's going to return me an array of numbers. This is exactly what we want, right? Now we have an array of numbers. The first one comes out is an 8. The second one that comes out is a 5, etc., etc., etc. So now we just need to create like an object here, like something like this. So I'm just going to call it frequency map equals an object. And instead of just numbers, what we're going to do is we're just going to loop over all the numbers. And I know there's like a really nice way and clean way to do this, but I just prefer doing it this way where I say if frequency of the number exists, then frequency of the number plus equals 1, else frequency of the number equals 1. Why is this yelling? I think it's yelling, oh, because I call frequency map. So let's just replace all of that. Cool. So now what comes out? Console.log, numbers, not numbers. What we need to do is console log out the frequency map. Cool. So now we have 1 comes out 15 times, 2 comes out 8 times, and so forth and so forth. So it looks like we got number 1 somewhat done. Cool. So now how do we make the graph? And this is kind of where we kind of need to be more familiar with CSS. I would say this problem is more, how do I describe it? It's more testing your CSS skills more than your JavaScript skills. Because once you have this, you already know like what the actual answer is, right? Now we need to figure out how do we translate data into visualization. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to call a div here, or define a div and call it graph. And I'll kind of just show you what a graph would typically look like. So let's just start from there. So the graph would have, we'll give it a box sizing of border box. Let's give it a width of 700 pixels. We'll give it a height of 500 pixels. We obviously don't see it because we haven't given it a border, but in this case, usually if we want to make like a solid box, we would do that. But we actually don't want to do that. We want to make a graph, right? So a graph would typically have a y-axis and an x-axis. So here, I'm just going to say border equals 0 pixels solid black. And then I'm going to say border left width, I believe, to 1 pixel. You see how that line comes down? And then let's make it, yeah, border bottom width to 1 pixel as well. Sweet. And then let's just push it in a little bit. So we'll give it padding left of 15 pixels, and padding right of another 15 pixels. And I think I spelled padding wrong. Whoops. Okay, cool. And that really doesn't do too much here because it's everything inside of the padding where we're going to draw all of our columns. And then let's just kind of push it into the center so it's a little easier to see. So I'll just give it a margin left of 100 pixels, maybe auto top down, and then 0. Cool. And then I think that is good for now. What I want to do here is now that we have this graph, I kind of want to visualize, okay, like how do I put columns into this graph, right? So let's just think about this in a single column. Say, for example, I have a div, and I'll give it a class of column. And I assume that these columns are gonna be at least 10 times or just a few times, right? Because we're going to have something similar to this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But let's just work with one column for now. And we need to style this column, right? We need to make it look good in the graph here. So we need to give this column a little bit of life. So maybe we can just, for fun, let's just give it a height of like 20% for now, even though we don't see it. We'll give it a background color of this AAA. We see it there. Cool. And then let's see. I just want to be really picky here because you'll notice that maybe graphs, like they have like a little bit of a curvature at the top left and the top right. So we'll just give it a border top left radius of 4 pixels and a border top right radius of 4 pixels. Cool. And obviously this doesn't look that good, right? Like imagine if we created another div here, what would happen? It's just stacking on top of each other, which is not quite what we want to do. Instead, we want to push this down to the bottom, right? So how do we push it down to the bottom? What we can do here is we can give the graph, which is the parent, a display of flex. And we can't see anything here, which is interesting. And maybe we just need to give this one flex 1. All right, cool. So you'll see that right now they're side to side and they're like literally stuck to each other like glue. So we need to give it a gap of 15 pixels maybe. And if you're familiar with Flexbox, I believe we could do align items flex end, which should bring it to the bottom. Perfect. And I think that's good for now. Let's see what else we can do here. So if we add more columns here, you'll see that the columns are all evenly split. And right now, they're all evenly distributed amongst heights because we give it a column height of 20%. But imagine if we just, I don't know, let's just give this style height of 20%. Did I mess that up? Style equals height of 20%. Do not use empty rule sets. Styles? No, that doesn't work. Well, let's not forget about this inline style because it's not that important anyways, but I'll just leave this at 20% just to kind of make it easier to read, but I'll probably get rid of it later. Cool. And another thing that we need to consider are these numbers, right? Like these numbers need to be on the bottom here. So each number is kind of associated with this column. So I think what I'm going to do here is just imagine that within each div, there is another div called maybe a class of number label, and we'll just give it 1. And here, let's just give this 2. And I realized the style wasn't working because I'm not working in React. That's my fault. Cool. So either way, we need to move this number to the center and then all the way down here. And the only way I believe that can work is we have to give this column a position relative. And then once we give it the position relative, we can make this one position absolute. So here, let's kind of give this. Actually, I think we could just give this column a position relative. And then we'll give number label position absolute. And we'll give it a left of 50%. And that'll move it to the center somewhat. We'll give it a bottom of 0. And then we'll translate minus 50%. That will move it to the center, and then maybe like 120%. Cool. So imagine if we're able to dynamically render this, right? That would be the ideal situation where we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 here. I think that's kind of what we want to build. So rather than hard coding this values, we want to do it in JavaScript. So I'm going to get rid of these columns, keep the graph. I'm going to get rid of this arbitrary height that I chose. Well, now we go to the JavaScript, and here is where we're going to have to kind of figure out and do some math. So I think we got the idea here. So we could say this part is done. Now, how do we kind of get the vertical numbers to show up on a single number and keep it somewhat proportional to the height of the graph? So the first thing I'm going to do is just say graph element equals document.query selector of the graph class. And I'm going to get, let's see, the keys of the frequency map. I believe it's actually, no, I could just do frequency map. So just to make it very clear on the right hand side, I'm going to do keys. Whoops, that didn't save. So let's just try it again. Keys, and let's see what happens. Keys is an array of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Perfect. Let's also get we're going to need to get the max y and then the min x and max x as well. And I'll kind of explain why we need to do those things, but let's just get it first. So if you want to get a max number from the values, what you need to do is do math.max of let's see, object.values of the frequency map. That'll give us the max y. Cool, max is 30. Cool. And then const min x equals math.min of the keys, actually. And then let's also console log that out in this little nice object. So min x is 1, and then const max x equals math.max of keys. And let's output that as well. Cool. So 1 to 10 is how we're going to try to figure out to dynamically render out these labels for the x's. We know that the y changes dynamically because the endpoint isn't always giving you the same exact output here. So if I refresh again, I'm sure it's going to be a different number. Yep, 25. So we don't really know what the max of y is going to be. It's always going to be changing depending on the frequency of that specific number. So first thing first is let's just figure out how do we create these X labels and then maybe try to generate that column that we were creating. So here we need to do for let X equals min X and X less than max X, I believe, or less than or equal to actually max X. We're just going to go up each one. And I believe it's actually possible for you to not have a key of a specific number. So let's just kind of be safe here and just say const frequency equals frequency map of the X. Otherwise, it's 0. So now if we console log out the frequency, what do we get? We're getting the values of this frequency map, right? Cool. So now that we know what the y value is, which is this frequency, we're just going to figure out the percentage of it relative to whatever the max value is. So imagine if the frequency here is 18, but the max value, why did I get rid of that? Let's just try it again. Console log max y, min x, and max x. So if we go up here and say our height is 21, we want to somehow say you are 21 while your highest y value is 30. So we have to proportionally figure out like what's 21 divided by 31 times by 100, and that's the percentage we want our y-axis to be. and 20, 21, 18, and so forth. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to say const height percentage equals the frequency divided by the max y value. And we're going to multiply that by 100. So that's the height percentage. And here we're going to create a element. And in this case, what we hard coded in our index.html with the div element, we're going to do it here. So const column equals document create element of a div. And we're also going to give this a class name is equal to column. And we're going to get the graph element, and we're going to append the child of the column. Cool. And then I think that should work. Let's refresh. Oh, we didn't give it a height. My bad. So we got to say column dot style dot height equals, and we're going to use the backticks here to get the height percentage, and then put a percent sign and save it. Cool. So we see what we want to see here, right? Which is the height percentage relative to the y-axis, which is perfect. The next thing we want to do here is figure out how to, let's see. And this is the height percentage relative to this box, right? So imagine I got rid of, I don't know, let's see, this one and this one, added 1 pixel. You'll see that it's just relative to this box that it magically exists. But in our case, we call it a graph because we got rid of this and then we uncommented this. Sweet. Now let's work on the number label. So after we append the child, maybe we could also get the number element equals document.create element of a div. We'll give it a class name of number label, I believe is what we called it. And just so we're semantically the same, I'm just going to call it number label element here, just to make it easier. And we'll give it a text content equal to X. And in our case, X is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, right? Until it hits the max X value. And this time, what we're going to say is we're going to get the column and we're going to append the child of the number label element here. Save that. Perfect. Cool. Now we have the numbers and the columns fully set. So we got this third one done. And now, actually, we got this one done as well. So we got to figure out number 5. How do we output the Y labels, right? And we're going to have to do some more finagling here where we say, now we're going to have to loop over the Y values and specifically the max of the Y. So let's just start off with this data fetching look. So it looks like we want to do it by tens, 0, 10, 20, 30. And this is something I want to kind of emphasize here in the interview process. Make sure you read what the actual prompt is and also look at the visualization, right? Like, what does it say? It says 0, 10, 20, 30. So maybe you can ask your boss or not your boss. Hopefully it's your future boss. I don't know. But maybe you could ask the person that's interviewing you that's saying like, hey, can I just do these in tens? And if that's the case, then we could kind of like work our way from there. But until we do that, it's always good to ask these kinds of questions. So if they say yes, you could have them in increments of 10. That's perfect for us. So here, we kind of need to figure out like how do we create this like CSS and all of that stuff. And I know I showed it. I know I showed you this like index.html version of it, but maybe in this case, I'm gonna just kind of show you how I would do it just using the JavaScript and then kind of finagling the CSS a little bit afterwards. So here I would say for number 5, we're gonna output the y-axis. So let's just do for let Maybe just call it y value equals 0 because it starts at y value less than the y max. And then we're just going to go up by 10. So we're going to say y value plus equals 10. Did I spell something wrong? Oh, it's max y. I apologize. Max y. Cool. And here we're just going to create a y label element, I guess. And we're going to call it document.create element of a div. And we're probably going to need to style it later. So I'm just going to give it a class name of y label, which is not going to do anything at the moment. And then here, we're also going to have to give it the y value here. So text content equals the y label. Oh, sorry, y value. And then here, let's just append the child of the y label or y label L. Cool. And let's refresh it. We can't see it right now, so there must be something going up with this. Let's just inspect the element. So we see, the thing is really small. Okay, and it only seems to be going horizontal, which is not ideal. But we got the graph. We got the y label element. Maybe it's because we gave it a text content of the y value. So where are you at the moment? Let's see. So these labels are here, but there's just not, they don't have any content in it. So did I spell text content wrong? I think I did. It's text content with the capital C. So let's refresh that. Okay, cool. So it's at 0, 10, 20. That's exactly what we want, but you'll notice that it's like way at the end. And we kind of don't want to do that. So I think we need to start doing some CSS here. Specifically, I'm just going to give this Y label some information. And from my understanding, since we're going to want to move it to the left of this box that we created, the first thing I'm going to do is give this a position of relative, which is our graph. Don't worry about that. Refresh. Cool. And then in this Y label, we're going to say position is absolute. And we're seeing that it's a little crunched to the side. Let's give it a left of 0. Awesome. And I believe let's just give it a transform of translate. So we need like negative like 150% maybe just to move it. Okay, I think that's fine. And then maybe we'll just give it a 50%. I don't know if that's what that's going to do. I don't think we need this, but we'll see. Cool. Now we need to figure out how do we push these numbers vertically, right? Like 0, 10, and then 20. So here, we're going to have to calculate the height percentage for each of them. So how do we do that? So you kind of have to do the y value divided by the max y times it by 100. So we're going to say percentage bottom, I guess. So since we're using position absolute, so const percentage bottom equals y value over the y max, or sorry, max y times it by 100. That'll give us the percentage of what the bottom should be. And this is assuming that we're like positioned absolute, and then we're like a bottom 10 pixels, bottom 20 pixels, bottom 50 pixels. But in this case, we're using percentages. So now what we're going to say is y label element dot style dot bottom equals backtick percentage bottom percent. Sweet. So let's save that, refresh. Awesome. It works. Sweet. So we know that the max is 32, so it's a little higher than our 30 y-axis, and I believe we're done. So you'll see that it says 20. We'll see that the max is 24. So you can see that this one is a little bit higher, but everything is proportionally coming out correctly, which is what we want. And I believe we are done. So that's how you make a API request, kind of put it into life using HTML and CSS. And overall, everything looks pretty good here. So I'm pretty happy with this. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I highly recommend you to try this out and figure it out on your own. This one was really awesome to do because it really challenges you not only on the JavaScript side, but primarily on how can you think about HTML and CSS in a more customer facing experience. So definitely look into this. Definitely check out Frontend Eval, and I'll see you in the next video. Talk to you later. Bye.